So, good morning. We are less than a week away. So the idea of this is to take this sort of nice rabbinic idea about Pardes, about 4 ways of reading the Torah or really anything. And I'm going to do 3 of them now, and Jason's coming in an hour, and he'll do not really the last one at all, but we'll play with it. So they're the 4 ways, a Peshat, Remez, Drash, and I'll say a bit more about the 4th one in a second. Peshat literally means rolled out, to make something sort of just in front of you. So what a Peshat read of the Bible would do would be explain something in its clearest literal sense. Maybe you've got a word that isn't in Hebrew, maybe it's in Ugaritic or Aramaic, or maybe it refers to a particular kind of a bird and you don't know what that bird is. You need someone just to tell you what the Peshat of that is. Remez literally means a hint or an allusion. Drash is an explanation, but that's associated with a particular form of rabbinics called midrash, which I love very much, which I'll say more about later. And then the last one in Pardes is sod, meaning secret or esoteric. And instead of doing sod, we're doing shira. We know we've breached every rule of letter and grammar to do that, but that's the plan. I'm sending around a pack, and there are 25, so there should be enough for us all. So we'll start with Peshat. You can read the Torah itself, and it gives you a start of what the Seder might end up being. So even as the children of Israel are wandering through the wilderness, you've got a sense of what Seder is going to be. But by the time you get to the Mishnah, by which I mean by the time you get to a document that was finished 1800 years ago, but the earliest parts of it are much, much older, you would recognize a huge amount from what we have today as the Seder. But what I think is really interesting is that when you read the Mishnah, you can start to realize what some of the ideas were originally, so that by the time you get to 2016, 5,776, you can kind of know what's going on. So we're going to read the Mishnah to try and work out what some of the original ideas were behind the Seder. Okay, so Mishnah Pesachim. We're going to start with some stuff around the Manish Tana. Why not? So who wants to share this first Mishnah from Pesachim? Go for it, Rasmus. Thank you.
When we extend the second part, and here the son goes to father, and if the son actually intelligence was his father instructed, how different this night is from all other nights.
Okay. Now, I've translated it slightly differently from how you might think about it. How different this night is from other nights sounds like a what? It's a statement. It doesn't sound like a question. Right? But I think it's a perfectly straightforward and fair translation of the Hebrew. They mix the second cup, and the ben sho'el et aviv, the child asks the father. I probably shouldn't have done that in a gendered sense, I apologize. If the son is lacking in intelligence to ask, the father says, Manish Tana halayla hazeh. And actually this now might start to make the Manish Tana a bit more sensible. Manish Tana halayla hazeh, because on all other nights we eat this and that, and tonight we only eat this. On all other nights we eat this and that, and tonight we only eat this. In other words, the original Manish Tana was not 4 questions, but 4 statements. Interesting. That would explain why directly following the Manish Tana, which we all understand as 4 questions, what doesn't appear directly following the Manish Tana in the Seder? Answers. Because the original Manish Tana wasn't questions. And the Hebrew is fine. Manish Tana halayla hazeh, how different is this night from all other nights? Or how different is this night from all other nights? If I was Canadian, I could do that better. Hey? Right? Very, very, very interesting. That's the first kind of insight to the Manish Tana. The second one is, what should an intelligent child ask their parents according to this Mishnah?
Why?
No, more technical. Let me ask the question this way. Have you ever in your Jewish experiences ever drunk a first cup of wine before a religiously significant meal? Do that again. Every Friday night. Every Friday night, right? It's called Kiddush, right? So the Seder night starts with Kiddush. We make Kiddush. We drink the first cup of wine. Anything unusual about that? No. Have you ever in your Jewish lives had a second cup of wine ritually poured before the meal? No. And actually, it looks like that the question that the intelligent child asks the father is, hang on, Mummy, second cup of wine before the meal? Huh, that's a bit unusual. Well, says the mother, funny you should mention that, my darling daughter. It's because... And now you're off. Can you see that? You won't find that in any book ever. I'm the only person I know who reads that Mishnah that way. I think it's a completely fair way to read the Mishnah. But I think that's what the original question was. All right. A bit more. So what we're going to do now is move from the Mishnah, which is massively early, so probably temple times, until between the years of sort of 300 to 500. Abaye is however early. I mean, these are still very, 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 very ancient texts. Someone just to share this. Go for it. Thank you. Ah, interesting. Okay. What's this business about a table going in and going away? We'll get to this later. There's a picture here, actually. Just turn over. Can you see there's a picture of a triclinorium? Is that the word that I'm looking for? Of a triclinium. And it would be people sort of lounging on these sorts of reclinery things. We'll say a bit more about this later. And they would. And how do you eat if you're lounging on one of these sort of reclinery things? You lean on your left hand, and there's a small table in front of you, and you eat from the table. We have a vestige of that in the Seder to do with the uncovering the matzah and the covering the matzah, or the lifting of the thing up and putting it down, bits and pieces like that. But it looks like people would bring tables in and take tables away at various points. And again, you can see that there's a Seder here, and let's assume that Abaye says, "Oh, this is a bit odd. Why are you doing this slightly odd thing?" And Rabbi says, funny you should answer. It's because of what our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. Ta, 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 ta. And actually, it turns out that if you get a decent conversation going, what don't you need to do at a Seder? You don't need to do the Manish Tana. The Manish Tana is the kind of catch safe to make sure that somebody somewhere is asking something or is learning something. Because otherwise, if you're doing it, if you are engaged in the discussion of what it was to leave Egypt and the nature of freedom and what an extraordinary miracle it was, and whether or not it was Moses and God, and as long as you're doing it, it's kind of fine. I'm not suggesting, particularly not if you have small children, that you ban the Manish Tana. But like what's originally going on? It's the catch safe in case nobody's having a proper conversation. Okay. There are different versions of the Mishnah. You'd expect that. It's a 2,000-year-old text that was passed down largely orally for so many years. And there's a version that you see if you will read it from out of the Talmud, but then there's another version called the Kaufman version, which is probably better. And actually, Maimonides, when Maimonides does his commentary on the Mishnah, he's got clearly this Kaufman version. And it's slightly different from the version of the Mishnah that we might be more familiar with. And we'll see it here. So I just gave you the beginning part of the Mishnah from Pesachim. And now let's have a look at it as Rambam had it before, as Maimonides had it before him. This is what Maimonides thought the Manish Tana was about. Someone else to read. Yeah, okay.
They makes the second half.
And sorry, and at this point, sorry. Okay, so again, the child is now asking and reading. So the question as to whether or not the Manish Tana is a question or a statement is kind of floating. But here we go. Let's see how we go with these questions. Okay, which we would recognise today as the... Which question? Yeah, it's the Karpas question with number. Yeah, my kids know this. Number. First one is matzah, second one is maror, third one is dipping. Right? Good. Okay, third one is dipping. Good. So the second question,
For a normal actually chametz or matzah, it's not only matzah.
which we would recognize as being question number one. Good.
For a normal actually roast, boiled, or stewed meat, it's not roast.
Oh, hello. I never heard such a thing, right? In all my years. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Let's just run through this and then we'll.
For a normal actually, for other vegetables, it's not roast.
Well, we recognize that, right?
For all other actually, either sitting or reclining, it's not or
Excellent. Well, we recognise that one. That would be the last one in the in what we would recognise as the Haggadah today. So the first odd thing to notice about this version of the Manish Tana is that there are 5 is the magic number for Pesach, right? Where does 4 come into Pesach? 4 cups of wine, 4 sons, 4 questions of the Manish Tana. Rashi says that the 4 cups are corresponding to 4 verbs that are used in a biblical verse where it says that God took you out, and took you out. Hotseti, lekachti, hetzelti, and something else. Right? There are 4 verbs that are used, and that gives us the origin of the 4 cups. But it looks like it didn't happen that way. It looks like that there weren't the specified 4 questions. It kind of floated. You can explain each of the 4 cups, I think, differently. I don't think there's a sort of a particular rule for the 4 cups. The only thing that really needs to be 4 are the 4 children. We'll get to that slightly later. Okay, so chametz or matzah we know, maror we know, sitting or leaning we'll spend a bit of time on because I think it's more complicated than we think we know. What's going on here? On all other nights we eat roast, boiled or stewed meat, this night roasted. Indeed, as we discussed on Friday night. Right, but before Sephardim and Ashkenazim, before the destruction of the temple, Dafka in the temple, the Paschal sacrifice was cooked, roasted. It was roasted, right? And actually, I mean, I talk about this all the time. I just think it's so interesting. The spit on which you roasted the Paschal sacrifice had to be made of wood, because you had to roast the entire lamb. You couldn't even make it out of metal with the possibility of griddling around the outside of the spit inside the animal. The lamb had to come into contact with fire. Coming through fire was incredibly important. Anything that we still do today about fire and Seder night? Before you sit down. Makes a terrible smell. Burning the egg, right? You bring the egg into contact with fire, and this idea, I mean, I kind of grew up hearing this, right? The more that you cook the egg, the tougher it gets. But, it's perhaps associated with this. The birth of the children of Israel from the narrow place, Mitzrayim, as it were, literally means narrow place, is that it comes through heat, intense heat, and out of that comes birth. It's sort of phoenix-like. We arise from the ashes of Mitzrayim. So the Paschal lamb was roasted with fire. It's not none of this sort of stewing, boiling, Nancy Bambi kind of stuff. It's real cooking. Good. So the Rambam, in his commentary on that Mishnah, says nowadays we don't include roast meat because we don't have the Paschal offering. Yeah, tomorrow the Rambam agrees with you. It's good. It's always nice to be on the same side of the Rambam. Okay. Now let's have a look at this one, and let me just do this one. The last question. Shebachol halelot anu yoshvin bein shebachol halelot anu yoshvin bein yoshvin uvein mesubin, which everybody always translates either sitting or reclining. Halayla hazeh, kulanu mesubin. This night we all recline. Now I'm going to play with this idea of mesubin, which we've translated as reclining, because I think there's some added juice to be extracted from this. It's just such a basic thing. I for all my life didn't know about this until I ended up studying this with Josh Culp, who I'm going to talk about in a second. So let me do the bit that I think we kind of know. Well, what's a feast look like? Anybody got any memories of great celebrations kicking around religiously at this time of year? Oh yes, weren't we talking about one a month ago, right? So at Purim we get this massive feast, and what's going on at the massive feast? There were beds. People would feast at beds, and we kind of know this because we now know about Romans. We've all seen videos of Roman parties and things. But we've also dug stuff up, and as I say, you've got that picture. So let me just do the bottom and then come back up. So I'm just sort of slightly jumping around. Josh Culp is a great guy. He is a PhD in Talmud and was one of the heads of the conservative yeshiva. And the Shechter Haggadah is a fantastic Haggadah if you're interested in this kind of quite sort of careful historical reading of what's going on. Reclining. Sorry, yeah. Someone just to share this. Stephen, thank you. Right. In the ancient Roman world, maybe the equivalent of this is having your dinner in front of the telly sat on the sofa, or sitting down properly, or yes, I think we should use the dining room this evening. It's that. If you're using the dining room, it's a proper meal. If you sat at the kitchen table, it's not. So so when you start reclining, it's a sign of a proper meal in that sense. You've invested it with a bit more importance. Good. Yeah. Sorry, brought to the diner? No, yeah. Okay. I mean, and those of us who've spent time travelling in less developed parts of the world know this business about left-handed and right-handed, right? The left hand is used for dirty purposes, and you just can't get that level of hygiene that you would wish. So you lean on your left hand and you use your right hand for eating. Let's just have another look at this picture. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back to the book. Let's just come back up slightly. Let's do this Tosefta. Tosefta, very, very old. I was teaching some Tosefta yesterday, but Tosefta is the same age as the Mishnah, more or less. And we're going to get the setup. I think this is really interesting. Yeah, someone just to share this Tosefta. Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
What is the arrangement of reclining? Where there are two cushions, the most important person reclines at the head of the first. The second is below them. Where there are three cushions, the most important person reclines at the head of the middle. The second is below them. The third is below.
Right? Did you get this? So the most important person goes across the top, as it were, and the next most important person, they put their head next to the most important person's feet. Now, the advantage of that. So this is we've got. Imagine there's going to be three of us. So we're going to 1, 2, 3. Is that if I'm the most important person, I can eat with my right hand, and the second most important person who's got their head next to the feet of the first most important person, they can also eat with their hand. But the third most important person, he's got his feet next to the other person's feet. He's either way away, or to get his head up, he has to eat with his left hand. They're all quite dangerous, and so you can see how the positioning of all of this is really, really kind of neat. Let me just share just one little piece of halacha. There is a discussion as to whether or not women should or shouldn't recline at the Seder. Gotta love Judaism. This is how the discussion begins. Only important women should recline at the Seder. This is how the discussion then continues. All women are very important at the Seder, and therefore all women should lead. So, and actually that line, kulanu masubin, all of us masubin, which at the moment we're understanding as leaning, is kind of tied into that. Which I think is kind of it's the rabbis showing an awareness of some of their problematic gendered understanding. Doesn't happen so often. Yeah, Rose.
Didn't anyone that said that might be Christian, but all Jews were?
Yes, but I think he's talking in the context of the Seder. I don't think Is there a problem of particularism in Rabbinic Judaism? Yes. Is that a good example of it? I don't think so. Yeah.
In other words, you had back to Tuesday,
Yes. I mean, well, he's just talking about a Seder night, really. I think. Yeah. Okay. Let's just do the next two because they're somehow, I think, kind of tied up to this just incredibly interesting idea about Pesach that I think I put in the slightly in the weekly words this week as well. Just to share these next two because I think they're really saying the same thing. Yeah.
On the eve of Pesach, even the poor of Israel don't eat until they are leaving. So Rabbi 11, when the word slaves been standing up, and here they begin to make it known, when they have left surgery for freedom.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting. This is the fake it until you make it school of freedom. You know, I'm not feeling very free. I'm a slave. Never mind. Lie on this reclining thing and eat as if you were a wealthy Roman Greek noble, and that's how you'll begin to feel free. You know, you're forced into behaving as if you really are free, in the hope that somehow you feel freer. Does that make sense? A very, very interesting idea. And there's another really interesting idea that to do with the tamchui. The tamchui was the charitable pot of last resort. If you had more than 1 day's worth of meals, you couldn't go and get money from the tamchui. The tamchui were really for people who are utterly, utterly destitute. But you would use the tamchui to pay for wine for people to drink on Pesach.
Well, this is a bit curious because Pesach was celebrating ceasing to be slaves. And we're talking about still keeping slaves.
Right.
And then pretending they're free.
No. Well, it says, hang on, it doesn't quite say that. On the eve of Pesach, even the poor person leans. So it's not. I mean, it's not a slave as in somebody who is in servitude. But I mean, you know, let's say that. Let's say you lost all your money. You know, you've gambled away all your money, and in your mind you are a well-to-do person of the world, but you have absolutely no money at all, and you've had to pick up a job helping clean a house, and you should behave on Seder night as if you are the free person that you imagine yourself so to be. To sort of keep your chin up in the face of financial poverty. I think it's a very, very interesting idea. And I think this is even interesting because actually the point of the Rabbi Levi point is almost the opposite. You're not a slave. What are you doing eating standing up? I mean, I think we all do this to ourselves. You know, actually, you know what? We would all have the time to sit down and eat lunch. We would, you know, if we were a little better organised and if we gave ourselves the gift of a moment of pause in the middle of the day, we might even be more successful professionally because we'd have some space to sort of reflect on what it was we were doing rather than just charge around like, you know, hamsters. But we don't. So this is saying to us, you know that you're free. Stop. Well, hey, right? You can see that. I mean, you can. Right, that's what you can see in this picture. Can you see? There's a little person down there on the left hand side, bringing this in. This is the Harry Potter thing, right? The house elf in Harry Potter. For those of us who are Harry Potter fans, there is in the opening of Ari Shavit's really interesting book called Promised Lands, right? Promised Land. He opens with the story of his great grandfather Herbert Samuels, who was sent by Theodor Herzl to see whether or not the land of Israel would make a suitable place for the Jewish homeland. And he goes out there and he says, and he sees this, he sees that, he comes back with this huge report, and nowhere in the report does it mention there's anybody else living there. It's not funny, actually. I mean, it's deeply sad that we just don't see that. You're absolutely right.
Not only that, you don't see pictures of families. If you say that it is a shape, you know.
Where are the women? Where are the children?
Where are the rest of them?
Well, the children are right. The children are actually very important. I mean, these stories that you get in the Seder of all these rabbis sitting around and talking and discussing. those do feel like fairly privileged male-only environments, but they are very worried about the kids. They're not very worried about the women. They just don't see women. The best thing that I've written on this, it is in my book, which I also recommend, but it's at the end of my piece about can you have women lead prayer services, and I talk about the kind of massive androcentrism of rabbinic Judaism that results in, you get signs up in Borough Park saying, Talmud for everybody, men only, this kind of stuff. There just isn't that kind of, it's a problem. Well, it's hard because Hebrew doesn't quite. I've got a little bit about that today. Okay, so that's the reclining business. We know where it's coming from. It's coming out of a sort of a Greek-Roman sense that you try and sit as though you were massively free in a sort of formal meal. So let's make this just a little bit more complicated. I'm going elsewhere in the Mishnah, no longer in Pesachim, but instead to Brachot. And this is talking about the zimun, right? So the zimun is that thing that you say just before the grace after meals. If you've got a group of people who are around, so if you've got more than 3 or more than 10 people, you say a special introduction to the grace after meals. How do you know how many people you have sitting around? I mean, let's say that you are, everybody's taking their picnic out to a kind of a square outside the, where everybody's working. There's a whole bunch of people sitting around. Is that everybody sitting together, or is that everybody sitting separately? It's that, so it's not a bad question. And look at the Hebrew that they use when they're doing this. So the Mishnah Brachot, I'll do this one. When they sit, when they are yoshvin, yud shin vet, so to the verb to sit, you bless by yourself. But when you are heisevu, when you are musubin, which is the word that we got in the Manish Tana, one blesses on behalf of everybody because everybody's sitting together. Now this is very interesting because this doesn't seem to be about whether or not you're on a chair or a triclinium. This seems to me about whether or not you are sitting as a group of people together or as sort of disparate people sitting apart. Can you see that in that Mishnah? So here we have the commentary on that Mishnah. Sitting without savor, right? We've never, what does it mean to sit without savor? If with that reclining version of what savor means, we can't understand what this means. But if we understand in the context of Mishnah Brachot, we're going to get a whole new other understanding about it. When you sit without savor, it's a sign that you haven't come together to eat as a unit. In other words, on Seder night, the question, the Manish Tana now becomes, Shebachol halilo anu yoshvin, ben yoshvin uvein masubin. On all other nights, I come in from work at 6, and I have dinner at 6:30. My wife comes in from work at 7, she has dinner at 7:30. It's fine. Shebachol halilo anu yoshvin, ben yoshvin uvein masubin. It's fine. Halayla hazeh kulanu masubin. Everybody is there. Everybody sits together. The purpose of the Seder, or the specialness of the Seder, is that it is a communal coming together to make a proper meal sat together. Can you feel that is, so it's a completely different idea from vertical or horizontal. The specialness of the Seder night is in its collective effort. It's a very interesting idea. And now and that calls for ritual. Can you hear how that, if it's a formal meal and actually, if you've gone to, dinners at the Lord Mayor's mansion, everyone stands up and proposes the toast, and then you pass around the thingy, and there's somebody who proposes the thing to that, and at the beginning there's a thing. Like when you are masubin, all of a sudden you need ritual to make this important. Now that's what the Seder night is really about. It's a very, very interesting idea about what masubin really means. On to one of my all-time favourite scholars, Menachem Kasher, who was alive in the last century, living in New York, who knew absolutely everything. And he's got an English Haggadah, which is really nice, but this comes from his Hebrew extraordinary works. I'll do this as well. Talking about the Manish Tana. First, we should emphasise that the number of questions is not at all consistent in manuscripts of ancient Haggadot. We have 2 questions, we have 3 questions, 4 questions, 5 questions. Well, we've seen 5 and we know 4. So there is no proof that the question is late simply since it doesn't appear in the Mishnah. Here we go. Now, the word savor has 2 meanings aside from leaning to the left. Gosh, we thought we'd already We thought we came in here thinking that it meant leaning to the left. We've now got this business of eating together, and we're on our way to our third one. As it states in the Aruch, this is the first Talmudic dictionary, a circular arrangement of chairs to sit at for a meal. And there is also a Mishnah derived from Mishnah Brachot, which we just did, that they save and one blesses for them all. How can that mean leaning? Rather, the idea is that they ate in a group gathered together. For note that the Torah says that the Paschal offering was to be eaten b'vatachat. That's to say, the obligation of the Paschal offering is to eat it together in Seder, in a group. Leaning was just the natural way of eating throughout the year, but the essence of the obligation, Seder, was that a person should eat with their fellow and their family in Seder, that is to say, together. And this question applies even when the temple was standing. In other words, to say, it's a Torah law, right? Some people say that when we took out this business about roast and what's it, we put in a much later thing that's only about the kind of Greco-Roman triclinium thing. No, says Kasha, you have to eat Pesach, and that goes way back, because it's about this community endeavour. I'm going to skip the next page. Okay, good. We're doing very well. So that was some Peshat stuff, largely about the Manish Tana. 3 questions, 4 questions: the leaning, and the original question with this sort of original provocation of the second cup of wine. There's a lot more Peshat which I can share. The best place to find it, if you can find the Shechter Haggadah, is the Shechter Haggadah, and I suspect the best place to find the Shechter Haggadah is Joseph's bookstore in Temple Fortune, or John Trotter Books in the Manor House. Okay, Remez. I'm going to do something, quite different. I found this from the Haggadah supplement of the American Jewish World Service. So the American Jewish World Service is an extraordinary organisation that goes out and does work supporting the underdeveloped world on issues around AIDS and poverty, and they're very, 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 very sophisticated. And they've just produced some ideas of thinking about, we're eating matzah, and what about other people? 795 million people in the world can't leave the affliction of hunger. 3 million children under the age of 5 die from starvation. I think that number is now radically down. I think personally due to Bill Gates and the people that he's working with, which is Bill and Melinda Gates, which is extraordinary. So I would encourage you to allow your Seder to be a remez for broader discussions about the nature of the world, even if you don't end up kind of going there. It usually happens at the Seders that I go to is that somebody makes a broader point and somebody says, yes, but this is our story. That's all right. You can have a conversation about the tension between the particularist and the universalist. It's a perfectly good thing to worry about. But I'm going to share with you what I think is one of the most interesting remez, one of the most interesting hints that when I was reading the Dalai Lama's autobiography, Freedom in Exile, I was hugely struck by. Just in terms of whose story is this, and what does it mean to think of our story, right? Our Exodus narrative as something that other people have engaged with as well. So someone just to share this piece from the Dalai Lama. This is set at the moment of his having to flee Tibet. Do people here, I think, know the story. Roughly, the Chinese are coming. It's completely not safe, and he decides he has to flee. Someone want to read this? By the way, the Dalai Lama has spoken at New London Synagogue. In his first trip to London after fleeing to Dharamsala, he ended up speaking at New London Synagogue. Wow. Extraordinary story. I haven't properly got to the bottom. It was a sort of a dry hire of the shawl. It wasn't a New London Synagogue thing, but there's a picture in one of the early shawl mags. Anybody? Yeah, go for it.
A few minutes before 10 o'clock, now I ran up in the trousers and a long black coat. We were right alert in my workshop. We woke up and I was that belonged to the second paragraph holding my lip. Then slipping my glasses into my pocket, stepped outside.
Pause there. He was one of very few people who could afford glasses, right? So people knew who he was because he was the one who wore glasses. So he's in disguise, yeah.
I was very frightened. I was joined by 2 soldiers who said I could now have a crystal car, hardly able to see a thing. On reaching me out to war, we turned out with running out of about food. I could just make out the arm of the sword. He spoke to me in a low, reassuring voice. I was to keep quiet at all costs. And I thought that in that argument that Philip had that he was unattended and redeemed and respect was that you were allowed to pass through when a further word was spoken.
And the Dalai Lama is smuggled out of Dharamsala and smuggled out of Tibet, flees to India and subsequently sets up in Dharamsala in exile. So I read that and my mind went straight to this passage from the Talmud. This is the story of the destruction of the Second Temple, when the most important rabbinic leader inside the temple, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, is trying to get out. He's trying to get himself out of Jerusalem because he knows that Jerusalem is going to be utterly destroyed. He's going to try and get out, and as he gets out, save Judaism. I mean, it's less about him. He's trying to save Judaism by getting smuggled out. Abra Sikra, the head of the guard in Jerusalem, was the son of the sister of this rabbi. So he's this rabbi's nephew. And Rabbi Yochanan says to him, come and visit me privately. And Rabbi Yochanan says to the head of the guard, why are you carrying on this way? Everybody's starving in here. We need to make some kind of deal with the Romans. And his nephew, the head of the guard, says, what can I do? If I say anything to them, they'll kill me. They're just so interested in just fighting off the Romans. So the rabbi says, devise some plan for me. Perhaps I will be able to save a little. He says, pretend to be ill. Let everyone come to inquire about you. Bring something evil smelling and put it by you so they'll say that you're dead. Then let your disciples get under your bed, but no others, so they won't notice that you're still light. That's a little complicated. So he does this. He pretends that he's dead. And Rabbi Eliezer went under the bier from one side and Rabbi Joshua from the door, and they carried him out. And when they reached the door, some men wanted to put a lance through the bier to check that he's actually dead, because they don't want to let anybody out alive. And he says, shall the Romans say they have pierced their best rabbi? They wanted to give him a push, and they say, why don't you push the master? So they open the town gate for him, and he gets out. And actually he gets out and he sets up Jewish life again in Yavne. The first yeshiva was in a Karen for Yavne, in a vineyard in Yavne. And Rabbinic Judaism is smuggled out from what gets to be destroyed. I think this is round about the year 2000. The Dalai Lama invited a group of rabbis and Jewish teachers to Dharamsala to teach the Dalai Lama about how to do religion in exile. Very interesting question. Maybe it was earlier, maybe it was 1980s. Because there is a Tibetan culture that is alive and they want to preserve it in exile. And he invites this group of rabbis. And they all go, and the story is told in this magical book called The Jew and the Lotus. And there's about 5 or 6 rabbis and teachers who each kind of talk about Judaism in a different kind of a way. But Yitz Greenberg tells the story of the Seder. He says, you want to know how Jews survive in exile? Let me tell you about a Seder. Because if you understand a Seder, you understand how Jews survive in exile. It's a fascinating idea. And one of the people who was on this group was a sort of poet come author, Roger Kamenetz, who writes this book, The Jew and the Lotus. As Rabbi Yitz Greenberg told the story of the first century sages, I felt the power of our being there as Jews. Dharamsala, as much as one can argue by analogy, is surely the Tibetan Yavne. In this small Indian town with no more than 5,000 souls lies the main hope for the survival of Tibetan Buddhism. And I could see with a little squinting the Dalai Lama and his leading abbots and monks as the Buddhist equivalent of Yochanan ben Zakkai and his sages. Very interesting idea. So what's the remez? What's the hint about Judaism, about the Seder? The hint is it's a way of surviving in exile. It's a way of experiencing darkness in later parts in Jewish history, because we've been ke'ilu enslaved, we've been punished and beaten in so many different generations. It's a way of always feeling free in the context of that. It's a way of keeping the soul free, even if the exterior conditions are miserable. And I think these are really good things to talk about. This is the next 2 pages are also kind of playing with this idea of remez, of hints. And I've picked them from this organization called HIAS, which is it's an American organization that works to support refugees. And it's been such an awful year. And this notion about what does it mean to flee oppression, and what does it mean to come across water. And what does it need to need miracles? And what does it mean when you arrive? Are hugely live questions for me this year, as they so often have been. Someone wants to just share this piece here. I think this is good hinting stuff with which to chat through. And I say to Stephen, will you give us this? Yeah, just from the when I got out. When I found out. Sorry, yeah.
When I found out I got into the university, I immediately called my real mum in Afghanistan, and I haven't seen her since I was 14. My family, which belongs to the Hazaras, lived under a constant threat of the Taliban until one day the latter tried to run me over with a car. My parents feared for my life and sent me to Iran. At first I was fine all the time, but too much going on my own. When things got tougher there too, I came to Europe. I was just 17 when I came once more close to dying, this time in my attempt to cross to Cyprus on a boat from Turkey, along with 4 more Afghans. I'd never seen the sea before, and though I knew how to swim, the waves terrified me. When the sea got really rough and the oars of the boat broke one after another, I was back. I was rowing with all the strength I had in me. What kept me going was a 13-year-old boy who was constantly asking me, if I fall in the sea, will you save me? As long as I am alive and have nothing to fear, I kept on. We are still good friends. I love Thessaloniki, the town where I live now. But if I could, I would return to Afghanistan without second thoughts. My country is beautiful. There are amazing landscapes, natural resources, and high mountains. When you listen, it's peace.
I think these are all really interesting stories for us, and important stories, and the question about how we find ourselves as Jews kind of comfortable in our Englishness or Americanness, welcomed refugees. Well, it's interesting, most of the Jews who are members of this community who were born in other countries have been very welcomed here. They've come with visas because they kind of tick various kinds of boxes. When I think about when my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents arrived in this country, if they were to be judged by the same standards around issues around asylum that people are being judged today, not a chance. Not a chance. I mean, they were economic refugees who were who were persecuted a bit and had limited opportunity in the places that they came from, but they would never have been able to have passed the kinds of thresholds of today.
Robert, wasn't it the case that in 1900, I think it's 1905, the first invasion act was brought into enforcement to decide
Well, there's a huge amount of fear of the arrival of Jews at that time. The best book on that is by Todd Anderman. He has written a number of them, but the Jews of Georgia in England is a little earlier, but it goes into that period, and I think he's got the history of the Jews of England or something. Now, it's really interesting to look at some of the language of that time, and to see what of it was the same and what of it was different. I know that not all Muslims are desirous of beheading soldiers in the streets, of course not. But what were the things that the Jews were accused of? Taking all the jobs, clogging up, all the social housing, all those kinds of things. A lot of that language is very similar between what's being talked about now and what's being talked about other refugee waves. So this HIAS thing, and I've given you the website for it. I think it's a really interesting Seder supplement, and if there's anything from that you want to bring on your journeys, then please do. Okay, so that's a little bit of Peshat we've done, a little bit of Remez we've done. I'm now going to do a little bit of Drash. If you want more Drash, come on Tuesday, where I am teaching. Actually, it's an ongoing Midrash class, but this Tuesday between 12:30 and 1:30, we'll be looking at the central Drash, the central explication thing in the Seder, and that will then be available on Periscope for a day after if you want to watch it later. So, at the heart of the Seder is a biblical passage which is drawn from this section in Peshat Kitavo, in Deuteronomy. Sorry, I've turned over a page. Can you see where I am? I'm on this one. So would someone just care to read that? Just take a run straight the way through it, and then we'll come back and talk about it a bit more. Please, Teresa, thank you.
And it shall be when thou art come into the land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance, and dost possess it, and dwell therein. Thou shalt take the first of all the fruit of the ground, which thou shalt glean from thy land, that the Lord thy God giveth thee. And thou shalt put it in a basket, and shall go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, that cause his name to dwell there. And thou shalt count the priest that shall be in those days, and say unto him, I profess this day unto the Lord thy God, that I am come unto the land which the Lord swore unto our fathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of thy hand, and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy God.
Pause there. Do you think we could even do this in Hebrew, and people who can't handle the Hebrew quite as well as Ofra can follow in the English? Ofra, would you pick up the beginning of Pasuk Hey? Yeah.
וענית ואמרת לפני אדוני אלוהיך, ארמי עובד אבי, וירד מצרימה, ויגור שם במתי מעט, ויהי שם לגוי גדול עצום ורב. ויראו אותנו המצרים, ויענונו, ויתנו עלינו עבודה קשה. ונצעק אל אדוני אלוהי אבותינו, וישמע אדוני את קולנו, וירא את עוניינו ואת עמלנו ואת לחצנו. ויוציאנו אדוני ממצרים ביד חזקה ובזרוע נטויה ובמורא גדול ובאותות ובמופתים.
Pause there. Does that sound familiar? So that's the original context of what is called the Magid, from the biblical root Nun Gimel Dalad, meaning to tell, which is often instead of a Mugada or a Nugada, a Hagada or a Haggadah. So this is the Magid, and all the stuff, the 4 children, the Manishtana, the folding of the dipping of the thingy and the what's thing, it's all peripheral to this essential telling of the story. So let's just have a little look at the context of this. So when you come into the land, this is still being talked about to the Jews who are outside the land of Israel. They're still wandering through the wilderness. But when you come in, you get your first fruits. What time of year are we at if we're talking about first fruits? Who gardens fruits? Yes, Shavuot. Good. Shavuot. First fruits is June. Right? I mean, there's nothing. I mean, we haven't got any fruits on. Not that we grow so many fruits. We do have a few little olives from a tree, Gerald. Thank you very much for this. I mean, there's nothing there at Pesach, but by Shavuot there are the first fruits. So you take it's called Bikurim. You take your first fruits, and so you would do this every year, and you would go where? The place which God chose to cause his name to dwell there. It's a temple. You go with your first fruits up to the temple, and you go to the priest, and you say, and you have this little conversation, and the priest takes it out, and just have a look at this verse 5. The opening words before we hit Aramei Oved Avi, which I hope was familiar. The first word, the words in that is Va'anita va'amarta. And he answered and he said. It says here, and I shall speak and say. But really it's Anita va'amarta. And I think what that means is that it used to be done like this. You would go with your first fruit and you would come to the priest. And the priest would say to you, Aramei Oved Avi. And you would go, Aramei Oved Avi. And the priest would say, V'yered Mitzrayim. And you would say, V'yered Mitzrayim. And then the priest would say, and then you would respond. In other words, this passage, it exists in these kinds of little bite-sized chunks. The bite-sized chunks that we recognize from the way that we do them at the Seder. Not only is it already in bite-sized chunks, but it's so familiar because you had to do it every year. I mean, actually, you know what? What's wrong with that telling of the story? Nothing. I mean, it's a beautiful telling of the story. I mean, the only thing that you could accuse of being wrong is it doesn't mention Moses, but that's a topic for another side. But here we have the perfect story. the backstory. Down we go, and then the map backwards forwards. Couple of other thoughts. I mean, my aim is to finish at 11 so that Jason can come in. So I'm not checking any Facebook updates. What actually happens in the Haggadah is quite interesting. That you get each of these bite-sized chunks, and they each get connected back to an original moment in the book of Exodus. Because, of course, this is Deuteronomy. So what's going on is a kind of like a dance between the bite-sized chunk in Deuteronomy back into Exodus, the bite-sized chunk in Deuteronomy back into Exodus. I haven't brought them all for you, but what I did do is this. This is also available on as separate A4 sheets. If anybody wants to do this at their Seder night, you're very, very welcome. But I did this one year for Sam's actually. We had a bunch of tables, and we gave to each table, or you could do it with each pair or even each person, each one of these, and they made a sort of a living statue of them. And we went all the way round, and everybody did, one of these, and that was how we did the Magid. It's fine. I mean, again, it's about that idea that the important thing is the conversation. The important thing is to hit the actual words. I mean, Seder means Seder, and you should do, all the kind of rituals. But the important thing is the quality of what happens. And particularly if you've got young kids, or that if you go past 10:30, everybody's going to walk home immediately because nobody wants to be up later than that, because then it's a Friday night and you've got to get to bed. I mean, be sensitive to the people who are around and enjoy it and have fun. But it's what I think is important, which I think just so often gets lost, particularly because of typesetting. Typesetting in so many Haggadahs is really bad. They don't allow you to understand this from the way that it's typeset. But hopefully next time you come across a Haggadah, you'll feel this. Let me just do one last piece here. So I'm still in verse 5 here. So v'anita v'amarta lifnei Adonai Elohecha, and you respond and say, before the Lord your God, Arami Oved Avi. How is that translated? There. Where's my Haggadah?
I think it's on the edge of that little box.
How is Arami Oved Avi translated in verse 5? Warring Aramean was my father. Who is that talking about, by the way? V'yered Mitzrayma. A wandering Aramean was our father who went down to Egypt. Who was that? Jacob. Who came from Padan Aram? Could be a bunch of people. Could also be Abraham, right? Abraham also wandered down, to Egypt. So, but what's the midrash on Aramei Oved Avi? Does anyone remember it? What's the setup of that? Good. Right, remember how in each and every generation somebody tried to kill us. As it says, Aramei Oved Avi, understanding the root of Oved, not as wandering, but as destroy. Sorry? Yeah? An Aramean tried to kill my father. I mean, it's interesting. Can you hear how Avi, my father, I mean, it should really be, if it was truly to be an Aramean tried to kill my father, which the Haggadah understands as who's tried to kill my father, who's tried to kill who? Laban, right? And by the way, did anybody read that bit of the story where Laban tried to kill anybody? It's not there in the story. It's even a midrash already on a midrash. So he chases up. He's not happy with him, but it's not clear that he wants to kill him. They said Laban was even worse than Pharaoh. And so it's play. It's play, which is the key thing to understand about midrash, is that it's a game. But what's happened is that the story of the Jewish people becomes pulled into this sort of sense of in each and every generation somebody rises up to try and kill us. But don't worry, because just as at a time when Pharaoh tried to kill us, we survived. so too, whatever the experience that you're having today, it's going to be okay. So what I understand from that is that it's okay to play. It's okay to take the words of the Seder and say, you know what this reminds me of? Let me talk a little bit about Tibetan Buddhism, or let me talk a little bit about what's going on with refugees at the moment, or let me talk a little bit of, knock yourself out, Brexit. It's all fine, because by taking things out of context, dragging them into places that perhaps you hadn't thought that they really belonged, by allowing yourself to be free to play, you are doing precisely what the Haggadah's always done, particularly in this midrashic part here, particularly with that little line, Aramea Vedavi. I'm done. I think we're going to sing for a bit, and I might come back and do something mystical later, but maybe not.